Ladies and gentlemen, once again, here's Bob Dylan.
Bob Dylan is one of music's most iconic figures. Love him or hate him, one cannot dismiss that he is to this day influential and able to captivate audiences around the world. So much of his career has been sorted through with a fine-tooth comb, his interviews analyzed, his performances studied, his lyrics deciphered. Hell, people have even gone through his trash. There has been so much coverage on Dylan that there isn't much left we don't know about him. However, because he is so famous, we often overlook smaller footnotes in his career. It's funny in this respect to think that even among Dylan fans, there's room for people to be cult Dylan fans. One of these smaller footnotes will be the subject of today's video. I'm aiming to zoom in on my favorite Bob Dylan performance and my favorite sound that he was able to achieve. For some reason, despite its popularity, this performance has never had an official release. On the second season of Late Night with David Letterman, Bob Dylan played a set with a punk rock band hailing from LA, the Plugz. This pairing resulted in a noise that fans and publications cited as post-punk or new wave. Bonkers, right? Well, it's not as crazy as it sounds. In retrospect, people have actually credited Dylan, alongside many other musicians of course, as one of the pioneers of the punk movement. Perhaps not in the way he wrote his songs, but in his attitude, his criticism of mass media, and his determination to be provocative. Many cite the 1965 Newport Folk Festival, where Dylan and the band went electric despite the negative reception, as the prime example of Dylan giving punk. His subsequent tour continued to create the image of a countercultural outlaw who was hell-bent on keeping himself from being boxed in, despite Dylan's upbringing being relatively normal. But back to the point. Why this later performance over his much preferred eras? Because it was a memorable set of one of his least memorable albums. The Letterman performance, as I will refer to it in this video, took him out of his failing Christian era back into the status as a well-respected musician interested in transformation, preservation, and reinterpretation. March 22nd, 1984. This was about 5 months or so after the release of Bob's most recent album, Infidels, which, if you haven't heard it, is quite a laid-back and introspective record. For the most part. While it features your more traditional rock songs, it also draws on reggae and soft rock as well. Its lyrics range from the political and the absurd, sort of a bridge between the Dylan we all know and love and what he was experimenting with in the early 1980s. On Letterman, after a cooking segment where Liberace shows off his famous egg casserole. No, I'm not kidding.
Said, did you cook with those rings on? And I always say yes, because it makes him eat very slowly.
Bob and the boys take the stage intending to play songs from Infidels. At least, that's what the plan was. But Dylan decided to throw everyone a curveball.
Sonny Boy Williamson in E.
Sonny Boy Williamson in E, he said. The band breaks into a rough version of Don't Start Me Talkin'.
Well, about to tell the beauty shop man on the other side. She said, go back, boy, keep it inside. Don't stop me talking, I'll tell everything I know. Well, stop this signifying, somebody got to go.
Dylan and the Plugz followed up with 2 more songs. This time they were both from the album. License to Kill, and then Joker Man as the finale. By the end, the crowd is going nuts. The audience couldn't have expected the performance that they got. The new album did not sound like this. Although it was his most warmly received in years, Dylan's recent output of music was unpopular with most people, and he was kind of fading into obscurity, almost turning into a greatest hits act. This is all to say that his fans' expectations were all built up just for Bob to defy them, just like he always had done. Let's get into some context before the performance. Bob Dylan entered the 1980s about as Christian as can be. In a way, this is probably a very him move. The post-Rolling Thunder Review era was not kind to him. What followed that very successful run was a not-so-well-received album, Street Legal, a grueling tour in support of that album, a failed film, Ronaldo and Clara, and a divorce from his then-wife, Sarah Lones, which was followed by custody battles. These hurdles in life had to put strain and weight on the mind. Dylan began exploring Christianity perhaps as an outlet for his misfortune and pain, and thus became entrenched in a movement that was becoming increasingly unpopular. In fact, Dylan even took a 3-month course ran by the Association of Vineyard Churches. He released 3 albums during what fans have dubbed his Christian era. The sound of these albums is clean-cut, pristine, and grand. The songs were about religion, which Bob had certainly explored in the past. However, these songs were overtly Christian. Many would call this Dylan's attempt at gospel music. Bob was, of course, raised in a tight-knit Jewish community in Hibbing, Minnesota, so it made sense that religion was important. However, his conversion to this specific sect of Christianity just raised an eyebrow for many people, especially after his attachment to the Association of Vineyard Churches, who have their share of controversies. More simply, however, many fans were not so interested in this material. Many longtime consumers felt betrayed by Dylan, selling out once again, and any younger fans were either turned off by Dylan's rhetoric or the production of the albums. Bob would go on long tangents during shows about the Bible and promoting a more spiritual outlook.
He talked about religion. He preached.
Is that why you walked out?
That's why I walked out. Yeah.
He stinks! Man, he's the worst. He's bad. He don't sing nothing like he used to. That's it. You walked out? Yeah, it's a waste of my... Here's a ticket. Here, you want the ticket?
I paid $26 to go in there and see a show, and I could have went to church to see what I saw, you know?
While the first album of the Christian era, Slow Train Coming, was well received, even winning Dylan a Grammy,
I didn't expect this, and I want to thank the Lord for it.
his next 2 albums were universally dunked on by critics and fans alike. Robert Christgau of The Village Voice wrote about Saved as most likely a failed experiment or a pleasant piece of hack work. Yikes. By the release of the 3rd album, Shot of Love, people began finding things to praise about this new Dylan, such as his singing voice and the music itself, but everyone seemed to be getting sick of the lyrics. Perhaps in reaction to all this negativity, Dylan must have wanted to shake things up. He began searching for producers, considering people like David Bowie, Frank Zappa, or Elvis Costello, before finally settling on recording the album with Mark Knopfler as producer. So, wait a minute. How did we go from this
Standing on the water.
to this?
Freedom just around the corner for you.
Fans must have heard this album and thought that this sweeter sound with Mark Knopfler's glassy guitar work would be showcased. After all, the audience had about 5 months to digest the work, either from the radio, MTV, or purchasing the album itself. Infidels was popular. It placed 10th on the Village Voice's Paz and Jop Critics poll, Dylan's highest placement since Blood on the Tracks, which placed 4. Critics were skeptical of the lyrical content, although they praised its overall slick sound and production. This provided Dylan with a chance to subvert people's expectations, a tactic he was all too familiar with. While the performance certainly is a rockin' good time, the band almost sounds a bit under-rehearsed, as if they are improvising most of what's going on. It's the opposite of the record, which is precise. Years later, the members of the Plugz stated that there really wasn't much rehearsal time and that no one had any idea that Bob would decide that he wanted to play Sonny Boy. So, who are the guys behind him?
The Plugz.
If there was ever a movement that reflected what was going on when Bob Dylan got his start in the early 60s, it was the punk rock frenzy of the late 70s. This was the new sound of protest, the new sound that the kids wanted to hear, the new sound that they heard themselves in. Youths from all around the Southwest began to see Los Angeles as the place to make it if you wanted to be in a band. Among the many who flocked to Southern California was an ambitious young man from El Paso, Texas, Humberto Tito Lariva. Lariva's upbringing involved a lot of moving. He was born in Mexico before his family moved to Alaska, and then finally El Paso to settle down. After being kicked out of Yale University for sneaking into the student body for a full term, he arrived in Los Angeles in 1975. By 77, he formed what is now recognized as one of, if not LA's first DIY band, the Plugz, with a Z. Awesome band name. The press quickly labeled the band as Latino punk hailing from East LA. At the time, Lariva was actually the only Latino member, and he lived in Hollywood. Despite his numerous corrections to the LA Times and Weekly, they continued printing this misinformation. Lariva's band began to drum up a following. They started their own record label, Plugz Records, and recorded their debut album, Electrify Me. This was all in their first 2 years as a band. By 1979, the trio consisted of Tito Lariva as the guitarist and frontman, Charlie Quintana, or Chalo, on drums, and Barry McBride on bass. According to the story, Lariva and McBride drove to El Paso to formally ask Quintana's mom if her son could join the band. Being a guitarist and singer herself, she agreed, albeit teary-eyed. They became very integrated in the LA music scene, making friends and playing with many local LA bands. The band's first single, Move, Let It Go, features Quintana in the bathroom stall in Whiskey A Go-Go's dressing room. By 1980, McBride had left, and he was replaced by a cast of rotating bassists before Tony Marsico found an ad in a local LA paper called The Recycler. The ad stated, "Plugz seeking bassist." Marsico was a working musician who dropped out of college to pursue a career in music. Originally from Philadelphia, he toured with several bands playing cover songs before he was convinced to make his way out west. Once he stumbled on the ad, he joined the band after their second album, Better Luck, was finished. The music that the band played was obviously inspired by contemporary punk acts such as the Ramones and the Clash. Quintana described the music as fast, aggressive, and mean, but it was also graceful and beautiful. The Plugz were regulars on Sunset Boulevard in the 1980s. They played with other punk bands such as X and the Blasters in venues like Whiskey A Go-Go, Club Lingerie, the Hollywood Palladium, even including a sold-out show with X at the Greek Theater. They even traveled to play with early iterations of Black Flag and Minutemen. By the time they got the Dylan gig, they were getting cassette demos from David Byrne. It was a great time to be a young band in Los Angeles. The music scene was diverse, and it seemed like everyone was supporting each other regardless of genre or status. But how did the Plugz, this relatively obscure band that was on the rise, meet one of the world's most famous musicians? There's a debate as to whether Dylan was aware of the Plugz prior to meeting the band. There aren't too many sources corroborating this info, but Dylan was apparently into punk rock, and he'd be a regular at clubs in Malibu checking out the bands in the local scene, but no one really quite knows what the truth is. Allegedly, Dylan's son Jacob was into the band, sharing his interest with his father. What we do know is that Quintana would appear in Dylan's first music video for MTV, Sweetheart Like You. This was in December of 1983. Charlie Quintana's girlfriend, Vanilla Nuela, was doing secretarial work for a man named Gary Schaffner, who was Dylan's tour manager at the time. As the story goes, Vanilla heard from Schaffner that Dylan was looking for a couple of local musicians and actors to appear in a music video for a song on Dylan's forthcoming album. Vanilla jumped at the opportunity and suggested her boyfriend. Apparently, he and Dylan got on pretty well in between takes. Soon enough, he received a phone call, and he was invited to jam with Bob at his home at Point Doom in Malibu, California. Charlie was even encouraged to bring other musicians as well. It seemed as if Bob just wanted to play with some younger guys. According to Tony Marsico, Charlie brought up all the guitar players in town, one by one. He brought up all of his bass player friends, but he never asked me, and I didn't ask him. I was like, whatever, it's Charlie's thing. Bob just said bring more people until they found the right thing. After several other musicians came and went, Tony Marsico was finally invited by Quintana, but they still needed a guitarist. The Plugz had recently recruited a new member, Stephen Huffstetter, on guitar, and he was invited to jam, but for whatever reason, Dylan just wasn't vibing with his playing. It's unclear as to whether Tito Lariva was invited to play. Tony Marsico explains on the Twisted Rico podcast, Tito's the kind of guy that you can't really sit around and jam in a band with like you do in other bands. Tito does his thing, and that's what he knows how to do really well, Perhaps understanding that Tito might not be a good fit or simply uninterested, Tony decided instead to bring a good friend of the band, J.J. Holiday. When J.J. arrived, the band was set. They received word that after that first jam session, Bob wanted to continue playing. Maybe Bob just got sick of fucking auditioning people, Marsico speculates. The timeline here, it's a bit of a theory. Infidels was recorded from April to May in 1983. One of the first songs completed for the album was Sweetheart Like You. This was recorded on April 18th of that year. We can assume, due to that factor, that the song was picked for a music video. The video wasn't released until after the album was, October 27th, and then the single dropped in December of that year. So from the summer of 1983 to the fall, Dylan searched for musicians, found Chalo, and then fell into Marsico and Holiday. From the fall of 1983 to March 1984, Bob jammed on and off with the youngsters, recording demos and inviting a few others such as vocalist Clyde King. Every interview from the band describes the events positively, with warmth and disbelief at their circumstances. The Plugz, while a successful band, were not used to jamming with celebrities in their Malibu homes, guarded by security guards overlooking the Pacific Ocean. These sessions were laid back, and they were truly just jam sessions. They played loud versions of cover songs, reinterpretations of current Dylan songs, and just hung out. J.J. Holiday would make coffee during breaks, which apparently was quite to Bob's liking. Tony Marsico recounts the sessions. Bob would take out the guitar and just start strumming a couple chords. We all just fall in and jam on something. It was mostly instrumental, though he would mumble under stuff, not really sing words. We recognized a few of the older songs, but it was just a lot of getting a groove and a vibe. So we would just play on a song for 15-20 minutes. Some of the Dylan tunes that were played were from his most recent album, songs like Heart of Mine, Watered Down Love, and Saved. Cover songs included Gimme Some Lovin', which Dylan allegedly rocked out on, We Three, My Echo, My Shadow and Me, and Lost on the River. Some of these jams were actually caught on tape by sheer luck, as Tony Marsico brought a boombox with a record function. There isn't much singing, and the quality is less than desirable, but the fact that these kickbacks were recorded at all is astonishing. One of the reasons for the lackluster quality is because Bob wasn't able to thread his tape machine correctly. In fact, he did it in such a way that it spun backwards and flew across the room. So, thank you, Tony Marsico, for coming prepared. However, these rough demo tapes do lend themselves both to the mythical nature of the story, as well as the punk label that gets thrown on this mini-era. It's worth a listen. On the tape, you can mostly hear drums and Bob Dylan's guitar, with occasional vocals from him or Clyde King. On some of the tracks, you can even make out some of JJ's slide guitar. In addition to their good fortune of getting paid to jam with a celebrity, the Plugz even got a taste of Bob mania. One of the famous events from these jam sessions depicts the police interrupting a rehearsal. They were responding to noise complaints in the area and came knocking. Dylan hid in one of the back rooms of his home and told the Plugz to answer them and tell them that they were playing with Waylon Jennings. Chalo complied, but it was obvious to everyone whose home it was. Tony Marsico stated that he believed that they just wanted to catch a glimpse of Dylan. This was also caught on tape.
Uh-oh. Bob? You got some cops coming. Cops coming. Cops coming? Yeah, they're right up the driveway. What? Here? Say, William Jennings is in the back seat. You don't want to disturb William?
Throughout my research for this video, it became evident why Bob took such a liking to these young men. First of all, Tony Marsico and Charlie Quintana had been playing together in the Plugz for around 2 years at this point. They were a solid rhythm section, and they could listen to each other and respond very well. With the rhythm section locked in, J.J. Holiday was brought in by Marsico specifically because he is a great slide player and knows all these open tunings, which he thought Dylan would like. This happened to be right on the money, as open G tuning was apparently used on Letterman. Another possible explanation for the four getting along so well is their deep love of music. Marsico has gone on record stating his admiration for the band, who obviously played with Dylan in the 60s and 70s. J.J. Holiday spoke with Dylan about their influences: Leo Kottke, Stefan Grossman, Scotty Moore, Mississippi John Hurt, Johnny Cash, the list goes on. If you're big on Bob, you'll recognize these as some of his influences as well. Everyone discussed all kinds of things, from current events, MTV, and what was going on in music lately. According to Holiday, they specifically discussed The Clash during rehearsals. In fact, Bob was apparently the one to bring them up. These discussions clearly influenced the sound they achieved on Letterman. So, why does the album sound so different than the performance? Maybe Bob wanted out of the slick production and softer side just for a moment. Maybe he heard something in punk that resonated with him. He must have been keen enough to see that music from bands like the Plugz was modern folk in a way. Songs of protest, criticism, emphasis on community. Punk was also provocative and poked fun at the establishment. When Dylan met the Plugz, he was the establishment. Dylan, of course, always kept a pulse on what was going on, but there is a stark difference between paying attention and actively being involved in something. Playing with the Plugz was Dylan becoming involved. And it has been confirmed by members of the band, at least during their practices, that Dylan wanted to do something a bit more stripped back, a bit more vulnerable. But what was this all for? Despite the good nature of the rehearsals or jam sessions, there was never a show that they were scheduled to play. There wasn't anything that they were preparing for. It's almost as if Bob hired people to have fun with, to get his mojo back. After months of these jam sessions, there were eventually talks about doing some shows. One idea being to go to Hawaii, another doing an incognito tour of Latin America with the band. The idea was that they would show up to play bars unannounced, no press, no promotion. None of these panned out, unfortunately. In fact, in one interview, Dylan makes a reference to his regret in not touring with the band.
What made you decide to go back out on the road now?
Well, this is not the tour I wanted to do. I wanted to do a South American tour, and it just wasn't feasible at this time, so I took this tour. But I wanted to specifically to play South America, and Bill Graham is about the only promoter I know that can get in people down in South America. And he tried to do it, and then at the last moment, I was sort of set my mind mentally to do something, and we did this because the other one didn't come off.
One day, Bob Dylan came up to the Plugz with an idea to play a new late-night show hosted by David Letterman. The show, while only in its second season, was drumming up a huge cult following. Dylan must have found the setting to be the perfect place to showcase a raw sound of him playing some good old rock and roll, especially with his new band of 20-somethings ready to demonstrate their talents. An audience of youngsters and night owls. These were Dylan's people. The band enthusiastically agrees to the pitch. The date of March 22nd, 1984 was confirmed. March 22nd is an important date to all you Dylan historians out there. Just to speculate again, while doing research for this video, there was an interesting quote from J.J. Holiday. Letterman was March 22nd, 1984. I saw that Bringing It All Back Home was released on that day, March 22nd. It was a nice little twist to read, because he was bringing it all back home in his own way again on that day, wasn't he? I got chills reading that. At the time of this recording, it's been almost 60 years since that album came out. That album notably was the big change in Dylan's sound and songwriting. That's where he went electric. And perhaps that was on his mind before the show? Maybe the scrutiny that he was receiving in the late 70s and the early 80s reminded him of the scrutiny he was receiving after Newport in 65. It's anyone's guess, but it's interesting. Let's get back to the show. There wasn't really much preparation prior to the engagement. Dylan seemed confident, but he wrote the songs. The Plugz kept pressing for details from Bob or Bill Graham, his manager, but they kept getting unhelpful responses. Apparently, Bob told the band just go out there and look cute and punky. Very helpful. Even at the sound check, Bob keeps deciding to jam. He does play the 2 songs that he would play later that night, but the energy just isn't the same. He must have just been having way too much fun jamming with these guys. Allegedly, Paul Schaefer, Letterman's sidekick and bandleader, tried to hop in to play with the band, much to Dylan's annoyance. Bob told Bill Graham, "Lose the clown on the keyboard." With the band on the edge of their seats, nervousness setting in, Bob seemed more interested in what everyone was going to wear. He suggested J.J. Holiday wear a bandana, a la Keith Richards, and then Bob decided to switch outfits with Quintana because he liked his better. It's all very silly. It's just classic Bob. Finally, the time had arrived. The band took the stage, dressed to kill. For 12 minutes, the noise was like that of a band you'd hear out of an LA garage. While people often use the term punk to describe the music being played, it honestly sounds a lot more like the blues or closer to new wave. It certainly is punk, though, in that the performance is loud, stripped back, and off the cuff. The guitar and bass work are certainly reminiscent of bands like the Ramones and the Clash, and honestly, I may just be mentally ill, but I hear a little Gang of Four in there too. In fact, there are 2 major mistakes that people to this day continue to discuss, either as a subject of criticism or one of how well the band worked together. The first is that there is a false start to License to Kill. Normally when a band starts a song, someone counts in. It's typically the drummer or the frontman or a conductor, someone that everyone can easily find and hear. Bob starts singing the first verse without counting in at all, and then the band jumps right in and begins slightly off before quickly finding the spot of the song that they need to be in. The second mistake, and the more infamous, is not even the fault of the band or Dylan. It's the roadie's fault. To ride out to the end of Joker Man, Bob goes to pick up a harmonica and approaches the mic to start playing. Only one problem. Everyone can hear that the harmonica is in the wrong key. Oops. Luckily, as anyone who's performed knows, is that if a mistake happens, you keep going. And that's what the band does, and it sounds great. Charlie throws in some awesome fills on the drums, and so does JJ on the guitar, all while that pounding, hypnotic bass line from Tony just doesn't stop for a second. The 3 musicians hold it down, all while Bob frustratingly paces back and forth, waiting for the right harp. When he comes back, he starts shredding, bringing us all back home, ending one of rock and roll's greatest performances. In its legacy, people seem to either love the show or hate it. Either way you feel, it's definitely an intimate look at a celebrity. There's nothing to hide behind. The nerves are palpable. It's an electric and exciting performance. Immediately following the set, the band stated they felt just okay about how it went, but they have grown to appreciate it in later years, as it has become revered by audiences on the internet. One thing I also want to point out. Dylan is a class act during the show. He moves into the shadows, away from the camera, forcing the broadcast to cut to shots of the band. He gave these younger musicians the spotlight and a chance to get their 15 or 12 minutes of fame. After the performance, Letterman thanked the band and the evening ended. Bob and the Plugz hung out backstage and posed for a few pictures for Rolling Stone. Eventually, the time came for Dylan to leave. Supposedly, he was supposed to catch a Knicks game with Keith Richards. Dylan said to one of the members, "I'll call you on Monday," before getting into a limo and driving off. The call never came. It's a wonder as to why these 12 minutes became so famous, or infamous depending on who you ask. Letterman was starting to gain traction, which absolutely helped. And fans had to be curious as to what Bob was up to, since this was about 3 years since his last tour. Seeing him backed by a punk band at the time was probably incredibly refreshing. But truly, the internet is the reason why this is so popular, specifically because of YouTube and people sharing these clips on Reddit or Facebook or other social medias and discussion boards. I remember the day that I found this clip. I was a teenager. I just joined Reddit and I found the clip on some r/listen to this or whatever it was, and the user claimed post-punk Bob Dylan or something like that. was really cool because I was just getting into Bob Dylan, and I think that this sort of post-punky sound, or whatever you want to call it, kind of made it more accessible for me, at least his 80s period, that is. These clips hold a special place in my mind, as I'm sure they do many folks. One of the reasons that I find this set to be so special, especially now at my advanced age of 28 years old, living with this clip for over 10 years now, is that there is still no official release of the audio. Not the Malibu Jam sessions or the Letterman set. Okay, that's not entirely true. There actually is, at the time of this recording, only one single official release of the audio. It's of License to Kill, which, frustratingly, is not on any streaming service, at least right now. You have to purchase the full box set of Springtime in New York from the bootleg series, and you have to scrub through all the way to disc 5, and then there it is. It's just that song. That's it. Which is great, but you have to spend a shitload of money for it. This also took until 2021 to release, so almost 40 years. There's a few possible reasons for this. I'm sure there's a rights issue thrown in there somewhere, but I want to say the main reason is probably because of the mistakes that occurred. But I say, they already released License to Kill, which has a mistake in it, so please, release Joker Man. That's what the people want. The people want mistakes. The people want the real rock band. They want that rawness, you know? Anyway, I'm off my soapbox now. Despite the lack of an official release, the performance has achieved cult status among Dylan fans. There are countless bootlegs of the project, restorations of the video and audio by fans, t-shirts, and my personal favorite, Daniel Romano's outfit covered the entire Infidels album in the same style that Dylan and the Plugz played on Letterman. Its attention to detail for License to Kill and Joker Man are both on point, retaining both eras. Bob Dylan was becoming increasingly unpopular due to his sudden outspoken religious fervor. His influence was dwindling among his fans who used to champion him. It feels almost as if this night was Dylan's last chance to prove his merits as a performer before being excommunicated from his celebrated stature. And prove them he did. I think Dylan fans, at the time of seeing this performance, probably saw a glimmer of the old Bob, rearing his head for a moment before slipping back into hiding. While we may never know the full scoop of how everything came together, we do have bits and pieces that create a story, albeit one with some plot holes in it. We won't ever know if Bob Dylan's son showed him the Plugz, or the real reason why Bob wanted to play Sonny Boy Williamson, but I think this video serves as a pretty good guess. Thanks for watching.